This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. You're listening to a dragon dance procession at a Lunar New Year celebration in Wethersfield. I helped MC the event back in February and loved seeing the dragon dance in person. It's actually one of my favorite performances when it comes to the Lunar New Year celebrations. And I also witnessed the hundreds and hundreds of people who joined in on the festivities. In Connecticut, more than 170,000 Asian American and Pacific Islander people live in the state. The community is vast and varied. And so are their New Year traditions and celebrations, which span across months. And we are just days away from the Laotian New Year and Khmer New Year. This hour, we'll discuss the diversity of Lunar New Year celebrations around where we live. And our intern, Sajina Shrestha, attended the event in Wethersfield. You'll hear some of her interviews with attendees throughout the hour. And to start us off, here's South Windsor resident Michelle Nguyen describing how she celebrates.
So I'm Vietnamese. So at home we have a traditional Cây Mai, and during New Year we give out lì xì, especially to the young kids. And then we also participate on some of the Asian events around Connecticut. So I've been to pretty much 2 or 3 events now. I think this is my 3rd one.
What's your favorite part about these events?
Just community and people wearing, their traditional clothing, which is always gorgeous and beautiful. The lion dance is always amazing, even though my son is really scared of the lions. And just a sense of community and the representations of Asians in Connecticut.
And joining us first to talk about Lunar New Year celebrations is Dr. Quan Tran, who's the co-chair of the Asian Pacific American Coalition and also the senior lecturer on race, ethnicity, and migration at Yale. Thank you so much, Quan, for being here with us.
Thank you, Kat, for having me.
And listeners, let us know if you celebrate Lunar New Year. We want to hear from you. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Quan, I want to start this conversation by asking, I think there's been some kind of a debate that unfolds every year when it comes to January and February around Chinese New Year versus Lunar New Year. Can you tell us, what's the debate about?
Sure. So this is a debate about nomenclature, but also a debate about representation. Traditionally, in the context of the U.S., because of the prevalence of Chinese Americans and their cultural celebration, there's a tendency to lump a lot of other Asian American cultural celebration, especially New Year celebration, under the umbrella of Chinese New Year. And this is something that is quite interesting as a phenomenon. On the one hand, you see that there is recognition that there is something different about this particular New Year celebration, hence the name of the Chinese New Year. But then on the other hand, it is eclipsing the diversity of the various different Asian American groups that celebrate Lunar New Year or lunisolar New Year in various traditions. And the debate is about asking for a correction and asking for not to be lumped together. And it's an ongoing debate, and I don't think we actually can come down to one singular conclusion, but it's an interesting phenomenon to participate in and observe.
Well, and I think the fact that it's a phenomenon kind of shows us the multi-layerness of this and the diversity within this umbrella, right, of Chinese New Year versus Lunar New Year. Can you give us a sense of the range of Lunar New Year celebrations? I mean, we talked about earlier that we're coming at the Laotian New Year, and these celebrations can span almost half the year, with Hmong celebrations in November and Cambodian celebrations in April.
Yes. So in fact, there are more than 30, if not 40, different Asian American groups in Connecticut. And these varied groups come from different traditions and different histories, and the cultural celebration that they bring to the state of Connecticut range very widely. So, I think the concept of the New Year is really interesting because we function in a Western-dominant society. It takes for granted that the 1st of January in the Gregorian calendar is the first of the new year. But for different culture that are based on different kinds of temporal orientations, how one marks the new year and when one marks the new year follow other kinds of world knowledge making, right? And so in Connecticut, you already mentioned Khmer and the Lao New Years that are coming up. Thai communities are also celebrating their New Year's this weekend, as to the Nepalese community. And so New Year, as we see it, is an ongoing project. And there's always an opportunity to turn new leaves as the year progresses, depending on from what cultural tradition you're coming from.
Well, and then we've been talking about Lunar New Year, but you've also mentioned lunisolar. So can you tell us the difference between lunar and lunisolar?
So yes, so even this goes back to this question about the debate, right?
Right.
This name of Lunar New Year is actually a misnomer because the Lunar New Year or Chinese New Year that we're thinking about is actually not a true Lunar New Year. It's based on a lunisolar calendar, which is a combination of the moon and the sun rotation. And so the true Lunar New Year is actually more close to the Islamic calendar. And many of the tradition that can kind of trace back to some of those influences are the true Lunar New Year. So that's what makes it so interesting, is that why are we arguing about names and in ways in which when we're looking at it technically, there's still something unsound about it.
And because I think a lot of us learn about Lunar New Year previously from the term Chinese New Year, and we recognize that's being used widely enough to now cause a confusion. And I mean, this has been happening for years. It's not a new thing. Why do you think that is? Like, what do you think caused the confusion?
You mean the confusion in terms of the dominant culture looking into how these communities are celebrating? I think the confusion has to do with a lack of understanding about the various nuances of what Asian America constitute, and maybe a lack of opportunity to really learn what is going on behind these cultural traditions, behind the celebrations, but a deeper understanding of what is the world-making philosophy that create these celebrations in the first place. And, with some things that only on the superficial surface, you won't be able to understand all those nuances. And it's really easy to mistakenly lump them together. So that confusion has, I think, to do a lot with a lack of knowledge and understanding.
And as I think we sort of learn more about the nuances and with these ongoing conversations and mentioning the lunisolar distinction and correction that you've made earlier, can you give us a sense of the range of the natural rhythms that really dictate when these different events occur? If it's not the lunar calendar, as you mentioned, like I remember as a kid, I've been told that, oh yeah, we go by the lunar calendar. But as a kid, I didn't know what that meant. Like I couldn't understand like, oh, why is it different every year until I became an adult. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think there's a conception that we take, time as something that is pretty identical every year, but truly it's not, because there are shorter years, there are longer years. In the Gregorian calendar, we have the leap year, right, to account for the ways in which there's not a really constant evolution of the time. Similarly, in other calendars, including the lunar and the lunisolar calendar, there are ways in which that the Earth is not perfectly spinning in that way. So all of these things are to account for the variation of time. And when we think of time in that term, we really begin to see that, right, time is a construct that is created by various culture to kind of order the passing of time. And in so doing, it leads to also different kinds of cultural practices and understanding. And when you look at the moon or the sun, all of these things are elements that are in the earth and in the universe, right? So orienting towards these things and making sure that there's flexibility and adaptation to that is a very interesting way of thinking about human existence, right? Like we can't take anything for granted, not even the passage of time.
Right.
And those become very deeply philosophical. And I think some of those things are the things that get lost when we have only the debates about the naming of it. For me, it's more interesting to begin to dig deeper into that conversation.
And how deep? What are those nuances or what are those philosophical, waxings are you thinking about in terms of when you mention, I want to dig deeper?
So I'm thinking about how do we, so for example, when we say the 12 zodiacs, right, we know the 12 animals. But actually, right, those 12 animals are also very nuanced based on other kinds of elements. So when we're calculating the year and the age and the zodiac of someone, it's not just the animal. It's how is that aligned with the earthly elements that these animals are functioning in, right? Or how there's a belief that whatever year that you're born into, these animals carry a certain kind of attributes, right, that become a way of signposting your personality or the kind of life that you'll live. And those are the kind of rich cultural nuances that we should be more aware of and find more space to allow for that knowledge to enrich us.
I personally really enjoy the mythologies behind the zodiacs. Can you tell us what are the 12 animals?
Sure. I have to do that in Vietnamese because
it.
that's how I learned it.
Actually, I can only do it in Taiwanese.
Yeah, that's so, and I think that's really interesting, right?
Right.
So in the Vietnamese order is Tý Sửu Dân Mèo Thiên Tỵ Ngọ Mùi Thân Dậu Tuất Hải. Right, leading the pack is the rat, and then we have the ox, tiger, rabbit, dragon, snake, horse, goat, monkey, rooster, dog, and pig. Now, there's a nuance in even that listing of animals because in different cultural contexts, there's a substitution of those animals. So in the Vietnamese context, we don't have the rabbit, but we have the cat. I think Korean and Japanese don't have the goat, but they have the sheep, right? And those kinds of differences actually speak to, a phenomenon that one could call a localization of how these knowledge, as they were moving across space and time, got adapted to more local contexts. So it is known that the zodiac is from China, right? A cultural practice from China. And as China, over a long historical period, has had different presence in these other Asian spaces, the importation of Chinese knowledge system are there in these local spaces. But at the same time, these local communities are also developing their own ways of thinking about time and how to combine local knowledge and what is then brought into through Chinese domination.
And so does Lunar New Year help us refer to more of these cultural observations as we continue to learn, as we continue to untangle perhaps misconceptions?
Yes, because it's a signal that, right, there are more than just one kind of calendar. It's a signaling that other people celebrate things differently. It's a signaling that the world that people orbit in are oriented differently. And I think the variation in how we name the New Year celebration becomes a signpost and a placeholder for larger conversations.
And well, how do you celebrate New Year?
So in Vietnamese tradition, we call it Tết. And it is a time that we gather families together. We would clean the house like mad a couple of days before because of the belief that you also don't want to clean your house in the first couple of days of New Year because should good luck come in, you don't want to throw good luck out.
Right. Don't do that. Don't do that.
And we cook, delicious foods. And all of that are a way in which communities and families throughout a very, very busy time of the year get to put all of the other work aside to really focus on family and on traditions.
I really love that because it's also a spring festival for some celebrations, and it's like spring cleaning, right? So
yeah, and in spring cleaning, people go out to the graves of their ancestors and make nice those graves, and then to show that they are remembering their ancestors, right? So Lunar New Year celebration is more than just about the living. It's also about a remembrance of the deceased. It's also a time where it's collectively, I like to think of it as a collective birthday party because, everyone is then turned 1 year old once the new year turns over. So that's why we have the tradition of giving gifts. So the older people giving younger people the red envelope to wish them a good and happy new year. And in return, the young people wish the older adults great health, right? And all the good luck and the happiness of the year to come. So it's a beautiful tradition.
It really is, and it's a really big collective birthday party, as you're saying. You've been listening to Dr. Quan Tran, who will be staying with us, and we'll hear about one celebration in the works for this weekend. We want to hear about how you honor Lunar New Year. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. And just a quick reminder that we are in the middle of our April pledge drive. We rely on our listeners for support and hope you'll go to ctpublic.org/donate to become a sustaining member or up your monthly contribution. Thank you so much for your support. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This hour, we're discussing the diversity of New Year's traditions celebrated by the AAPI community where we live. And let's hear from another attendee at a February Lunar New Year celebration in Wethersfield. Our intern, Sajina Shrestha, spoke with a Beacon Falls resident, Dale Briere.
I was adopted when I was very young, little. My lunar, I am celebrating the way traditionally in Korea would. They do sebek, which is like they bow to, I guess, the elderly, and the elderly people always give the children money. The other thing that they do is they play yunori, which is a game that they play. And for me, I'm learning this recently, so I am here with Connecticut Korean School. I attend there to learn how to speak Korean, and this is my lunar this year.
It's your first Lunar New Year?
This is my first, yes.
Are you excited?
I am very excited. I am enjoying all of the events that's happening here, and I want to bring more of our Korean cultural lunar too to the table here.
What's your favorite, or what's the most interesting part you've learned about Korean Lunar New Year?
The most interesting part is that the family gets together and we enjoy each other, and I think that's the best part of anything that you do, but especially on this day.
And joining us now in the studio is Mike Keogh, who's a West Hartford resident, also the Senior Communication Officer at the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, as well as the founder of #IamNotAvirus. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kat, for having me.
And we also have with us Sounthaly Thammavong, who's a board member of the Asian Pacific American Coalition of Connecticut and also a Greater Hartford resident. Sounthaly, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me today.
And we also have still with us is Dr. Quan Tran, who is with Yale University. And just a quick reminder for our listeners that you can also give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Mike, you've been listening to the conversation that Quan and I have been having earlier. Would love to get a response of what are your thoughts about this debate that we're discussing in terms of Lunar New Year versus Chinese New Year?
Growing up, my family called it Chinese New Year's.
Same.
Yeah, we're Cambodian Chinese. You know, I started identifying more as Cambodian as I got older because of colorism within our community. I am a little bit darker, and so people wouldn't believe that I was Chinese. So when I was younger, without this knowledge or this nuance, understanding, I felt that Chinese New Year's was in January or February for my family, and then there was Cambodian New Year's in April. It wasn't until 2020 where a few of my friends told me, Mike, all the cool kids call it Lunar New Year's now.
Yeah, you want to join that club.
And, for me, when I think about Chinese New Year's, I think of my grandmother. My family are Cambodian American refugees. They survived the killing fields. And my grandmother lost 2 sons. I think many families lost people. But my grandmother lost 2 of my uncles, and she never spoke about them. You wouldn't hear any stories about them. You saw their pictures on the wall, and you felt their presence in the hurt she carried. So for us, Lunar New Year's, when we honor our ancestors, those are the ones that have passed. So I have vivid memories where our Chinese New Year celebrations were a little bit more solemn. Yeah, of course there was a lot of food, a lot of family, but it would be the one time my grandmother called their names to come join the family meal. And that sits with me. And I think that's the way I see our celebration of my family of Chinese New Year's. And it also made me dislike hot pot a lot.
No.
we have a large family, and
Right. I mean, I love a hot pot, so I'm feeling a little crushed right now, but I also understand why if you have too much of it. Well, I want to dig deeper in terms of how you and your family mark the New Year each year, but I also want to bring in Sounthaly. What about you? How do you celebrate, or what are your thoughts about this debate between Lunar New Year versus Chinese New Year?
Growing up for me in, a predominantly Caucasian city and town, Lunar New Year was something that was different, right? It's a different culture. So I'm Lao American, and we have our Lao New Year in April as well. And it was more of like confusion, like, oh, why is Chinese New Year, in January, February, but then we celebrate our New Year in April. So it's a lot of like, trying to figure out and then learning about the different things. So, our New Year is in April because it's the hottest time of year in Laos. And then it's the beginning of the monsoon season. So then that's the whole renewal, rebirth, like fresh start.
And how do you and your family mark the New Year, Sounthaly? Because Laotian New Year is also just days away, am I right?
Yes. So it's a 3-day festival. My family, we're a little secluded, isolated, if you will. So we do informal celebrations. We used to go to temple a lot with my mom, but, she's older now. And then with the pandemic, things have changed a little bit. But for celebrations, it's coming together. It's lots of food. It's cleaning, well-wishing, and washing away the bad luck.
Well, and I do love the sort of universality of the cleaning and washing away the bad luck and keep the luck in the house, because I think we all can use a lot of that now. Can you talk about some of the themes of the Laotian New Year? Because you also mentioned the monsoon. Does water play a role in the symbolism of Laotian New Year?
Yes. So when we go to temple, there's a traditional ceremony led by monks, and, they chant. And even growing up, I was always like, I'm conversational, but why can't I understand what, they're saying? And then come to find out it's, it's the Sanskrit, right? It's the older language. So then, learning about it, excuse me, the type of Buddhism that we hold is Tevada, which means way of heaven. And it's the idea that Buddhism came from India into Southeast Asia, but then we also already have shamanism and animism, ancestor worship. So that all gets woven into our tradition. So, we go to temple, we give alms, we ask for forgiveness. And then in my family, we always do a soma for my mother. And it's the idea of, asking for forgiveness and then asking for her blessings. So that's the time that the family comes together so that we can celebrate and honor our past and our current for our future.
And Mike, can you describe some of the elements and themes of the Khmer New Year that you'll be honoring with your family?
I think that just hit the mark on what we do. It's really, really similar. We go to temple. Temple's in Bristol, Connecticut on 247 Park Street.
Shout out.
It is open to the public. But we do go to temple and we do give alms. We ask for forgiveness. There's a lot of water involved. On Sunday is one of my favorite celebrations. Sunday, the younger generation go and wash the hands and feet of the elders down the line, and the elders give blessings. Last year, there was this really, really touching moment where two grandmothers were doing this, and both women were in the 80s, but the younger one was washing the older one's hands. And to see our elders get that old, it's a blessing just because so many have passed due to war, through old age, So it's almost this remembrance and this honoring of who came before. And there are spaces where you can light incense and bless the ones that have passed.
And you are so involved with the younger generation, really, and you have young kids yourself. So how have your kids reacted to these traditions and celebrations?
My kids celebrate Lunar New Year's, Cambodian New Year's, and Hmong New Year's. Their mother is Hmong American, and so they have a bunch of outfits. And for them, it's this place of just joy. You know, they can go into this room and see their cousins on any side of the celebration. My kids, I had to learn the old Sanskrit, which is called Palai, which is what the chants are done in Cambodian, Laos, and Thai, the old language, because my sons were chanting, and I was like, what are you saying? And, I found the English translations, but it's an overwhelming joy where they have grandparents. I had one grandparent growing up. Mm-hmm. My wife, her only surviving grandmother is in Australia. So for my kids to have all 4 grandparents, I think that is one of the biggest changes of being able to go into a community space with multiple generations.
Well, and I want to ask you about the Hmong traditions as well. Can you tell us about what that looks like?
I am not too familiar with the Hmong traditions. I've been going there for many years, about like 18 years now. But, there's a community there. There's a lot of food. Everyone brings food. There's a ball tossing game where kids can get to meet each other and they toss balls and they flirt. So I remember my first Hmong New Year's being that with Chang, But yeah, it's in the fall. And there's a small, tight Hmong community in New England. They ended up here for work, a lot of them. And there are 3 celebrations in New England or 4 celebrations. There's Fitchburg, which is really big. There's Providence. And in Connecticut, there's Enfield and Western Mass, like Springfield. And the community actually does it between September till November. And the reason why was so that they could support one another's New Year's. Yeah.
And how do you continue some of the traditions that you described growing up? And do you continue those traditions with your kids and your family?
Yes. We still go to, Quan came with us to my mom's this year. But a lot of it's at my mom's house. I learned to cook a lot of the meals. So a lot of times it's cooking your favorite foods. On the eve when we're at home, I do cook a meal and prepare for my grandmother. Her portrait is in our dining room, and we have a little space to light incense. And I cook her favorite meals, and I call her.
Well, I love that you describe your kids' experiences as this overwhelming joy when these traditions are happening. And Quan, I want to ask you the same question in terms of, you have kids yourself. Why is it important to continue these traditions with your children? And what has that been like for you?
Yeah, so it's something that it defines who I am. And as a part as a parent, you want to pass down to your children what is the best that you have known or that you've experienced. And so sharing traditions of New Year celebration is a way of connecting the younger generation to those that came before them. I have a mixed race household, and so it's also very important for my children to learn about all different sides of their heritage. Mm-hmm. And I teach at a Vietnamese temple, and for me, these are the kinds of spaces that we need to hold open for our younger people, because they grow up in predominantly Caucasian communities, and their everyday orientation may not have the space for them to explore these other ways of knowing and being. And so creating that space through everyday practice in the household, creating a space in community spaces, allow them to at least know that there is something that exists out there for them, and their embracing of it will come in time.
And Sounthaly, what about you? Why do you think it's important to sort of continue these traditions in the way that you can continue these traditions?
So I have two young children, and it's been a blessing to be able to critically think about, my space in the world, right? So as a 1.5 generation foreign born, but grew up in Connecticut, it was always we weren't, Asian enough, or we weren't Caucasian enough, or however. But then to be able to then revisit these traditions and, teach and share with my children. And then even in our friend groups, because we have a very multicultural group of friends, and sharing these things that bring us joy, that is celebration and honoring our heritages and our cultures. I actually read a book to my son's first grade class called "Mommy Eats Grasshoppers," and so that was, introducing our culture and his love of food to his friends. And then to frame it, as our New Year is coming up. I know you just celebrated Easter and Lunar New Year. So, it's a different perspective. It's a different worldview.
And so all three of you mentioned that in all three of your households, there are multiple layers to sort of peel back and to learn and to either revisit or bring in traditions. So Mike, you touched on earlier that what I just said, there's a diversity of celebrations in one household. So can you talk about that being a part of this tendency to sort of overgeneralize the celebrations or overgeneralize the traditions?
Growing up, I felt that there was this generalization that one Asian community was it, and everything was lumped into it. Kind of what Dr. Tran was talking about earlier. And I feel like now there's this plethora of stories that are coming out. I just picked up some Hmong book for my child called The Rock in My Throat. Ooh, I hope I don't cry. So, The Rock in My Throat is by Khao Clea Yang. And she has this story about a rock growing in her throat because her mom is being mocked at a grocery store and she no longer speaks. I knew what that felt like, to have your parents walk into a room and have people kind of talk loudly to them, talk down to them. I've had with my grandmother when she was asking for a temporary visa for her younger sisters to come visit her. The doctor looked at me and said, well, now she has a friend to speak Ching Chong with. And because the doctor wrote the recommendation. And at that time, I didn't know how to process it. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to lose this paper.
Right.
And when I think about allowing my children the opportunity to see all of themselves, it gives them that language to push back against that, sometimes that racism that comes in with being Asian American. Sometimes or it gives them the opportunity to educate their friends, right? Another book I read was in Chloe's New Year's. I read it to my kids' class, and there's a part where it's like fish eyes. And all the kids will go, ew. And I will say, I thought the same thing when I was your age. And then my grandmother made me try it. And it was my favorite piece of the fish, And my son was like, Daddy, I want to order fish eyes next time we go to Chinatown. Or like a whole fish when we go to Chinatown so I can try it. There are these moments of being able to live in our full selves.
Well, I remember a similar story where my Taiwanese grandmother would want me to eat the fish eyes, and she's telling me that I will be smarter if I had some. And I regret that I did not, because I think I could have been smarter if I had those fish eyes. Well, and I mean, I'm sure that, unfortunately, that's a story I think resonates with a lot of people. I certainly have feelings now that, listening to you share that story. Quan, I want to ask you to respond to that. Is that something that you, does it resonate with you?
Yeah, I think pushing back against lumping and making room to affirm our own identities and reinforce that is so critical. I think the model of assimilation that takes place in this country does great violence to the ways in which, all of our diverse communities come in. And I'm not just saying that only about Asian Americans, but I think about also the losses of cultural knowledge and nuances that other European Americans also experience, right, through the lens of assimilation. And that's because the pressure of the assimilation requires that you forget and you deny your heritage in ways that actually chip away at your family history, right? Chips away at your identity. And so through that, when we are able to create space, create community that celebrate, that recognize the diversity of who we are, that's empowering. And I think those are worthy things to do and to do it together.
And we're going to head to a break pretty soon here, but Sounthaly, I would love to get a quick reaction from you from this as well. Does Mike's story resonate with you too?
Oh, absolutely. Growing up in a predominantly Caucasian town, you're always looked and seen as the other, right? So for me growing up, I knew I was different and I embraced that. And I always think about the time where I brought my own lunch from home to school, and one of my friends was being nosy and was like, "Oh, what you eating?" And it was sticky rice and beef tongue, but I didn't tell him that, and he ate it and he loved it. And then fast forward like 5 years, like, "Oh, by the way, you had cow tongue," and it's the idea that things may be different, but we can all find the commonalities together. But it takes that strength, right, to be okay in your difference.
And before we head to break, I do want to take a moment to go back to that Lunar New Year celebration in Wethersfield. Our intern Sajina spoke to Hopkins students Angelina and Jason, who are there representing their youth nonprofit, Here Story, which seeks to build AAPI identity confidence across Connecticut, especially in predominantly white areas. Let's take a listen.
One tradition that my family has is that the moms of the family cut everyone's hair. So I got a fresh haircut before Lunar New Year started, and my dad did as well, my grandparents, everybody. That's kind of our tradition.
Do you like your new hair?
Of course I love my new hair.
Can you describe what it looks like?
Well, I used to have pretty long hair, and now it's just a little trim because I'm not that brave. It's just a few inches shorter past my shoulders. Yeah.
So the hair cutting, is it specifically for your family or for your culture, or?
Yeah, so this is definitely a Chinese tradition. I'm not sure about other Asian countries as well, but cutting off our hair is a way to relieve the bad spirits, which is the center of a lot of Lunar New Year traditions.
Cool. So what do you do?
My mom also cuts my hair, but very importantly before Chinese New Year, because if you do it during or after, that is a sign of bad luck. What we do that I'm sure many other Chinese Americans do is we have long FaceTime calls with our relatives back home, and just 拜年 and all the words of good luck.
Quan, Tran, Mike Keo, and Sounthaly Thammavong will be sticking around with us. And listeners, let us know if you celebrate Lunar New Year. Join the conversation 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. And just another quick reminder that we are in the middle of our April pledge drive. We rely on our listeners for support and hope you'll go to ctpublic.org/donate to become a sustaining member or up your monthly contribution. And thank you so much for your support. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This hour, we're discussing the many ways Connecticut residents honor the Lunar New Year and the diversity of the Asian American and Pacific Islander community around where we live. Here's Bina Yoon, an Ansonia resident, describing some of her new traditions with our intern, Sajina Shrestha, while at the Lunar New Year event in Wethersfield.
Well, I'm an adoptee, so I've only started celebrating a couple years ago when I started learning about my heritage. And so we've been going to a lot of different events, and then we also had at our house, I invited my adoptive father over and my son, and we I did a lot of cooking. I cooked all day. So,
what did you cook?
Let's see, galbi, bulgogi, japchae, tuk-tuk, what else was there? There was a lot. I don't know.
It was all a flurry because it was so much.
Yes, yeah.
Do you have like a favorite tradition that you're doing?
I think it's just, each year learning a little bit more about what it is that we do as Koreans during Lunar New Year and teaching my son, who loves it all. So.
And back with me to have this conversation about Lunar New Year is Dr. Quan Tran, who teaches at Yale University, Mike Keogh, who's a senior communication officer at the Hartford Foundation, and Sounthaly Thammavong, who's a board member of the Asian Pacific American Coalition of Connecticut. So Quan, you're involved with AAPI, also known as the Asian Pacific American Coalition of Connecticut. Can you talk about the number of New Year's events grown in recent years? Because we've had a conversation where we were both shocked at how many people were at the Wethersfield event recently.
Sure. So 2 ways to think about it. Communities have always been celebrating their New Year's. It seems exponentially visible now is because we're learning about them, right? So, for example, within the Vietnamese American community, there are usually 4 or 5 different New Year celebrations. It's only more recently that we are learning about these spaces. So in that one way, one can think that communities have always been celebrating and we're learning about them. And so it's new to us. The other way of thinking about that is there's more acceptance now in the dominant culture, and that acceptance allows us to really be in public with our celebration. So the Lunar New Year celebration that we had in Wethersfield, that was co-organized by AAPI, as well as the Connecticut Museum of Culture and History and the UConn Asian and Asian American Studies Institute, is one way for us to take up that public space, right? And bringing all of these celebrations to the fore. So that was a very Asian American space. It was a very Asian American Lunar New Year celebration. It differs from the individual ethnic celebration that takes place in these various communities. And that is a sign of community formation, and it is a sign of a community emergence. The Korean American community celebrate their New Year, their Lunar New Year. The Japanese American also do so, the Filipino American. So all of these things are things that already happen in Connecticut. But we're in a space now where I think there's more visibility, there's more opportunities for us to come together.
Well, I've had a lot of conversations during that event too, where a lot of us were sharing that this is either the first time they're celebrating Lunar New Year or they're all in the process of relearning or revisiting Lunar New Year traditions, as we've been discussing this whole hour, really. And we've heard from Bina just now, even Del Briere earlier in the show. So Sounthaly, I would love to ask your perspective, especially being on AAPI. Are you seeing this experience of discovering or reconnecting with one's heritage a common one?
Oh, absolutely. When we think about, Southeast Asians in Connecticut and the diaspora, right? It's folks were coming over in the 70s and the 80s, and, those are our OGs, right?
Right.
And in our communities, we kind of keep to ourselves, the whole self-sufficiency, we come for opportunity, but then, it's the culture that kind of keeps us together for success. But then as American-born, children, thinking about our place in this context, we're more open to talk about it. And then with social media and the internet, it's being able to connect the past, our culture and our heritage together. And there are large Southeast Asian communities. I know there's a big Lao community in Britain. My sister is in Rhode Island and Woonsocket, so that's really large. And even then, going to my first Dragon Boat festival in the 90s was an eye-opening experience. And to see it now and to see how it grows and to agree with Dr. Tran, it's the idea that we're more open to it and we want to share. And society itself is more open to it as well.
And Mike, you're very involved in helping up with the upcoming Khmer New Year celebration this weekend that's hosted by the Cambodian Buddhist Society of Connecticut in Bristol. Can you tell us about the weekend's events? What can we expect here?
On Saturday, doors open around 8:30. Those are mostly the religious aspect of it. There's a lot of chanting, prepared to sit for a while. Around 11:30, that's when it's more like the communal eating. There's food vendors. There's a flea market with a bunch of other vendors, and there's a live band this year. They'll also be doing a brief ceremony of the angel, greeting the new. We have these angels that are represent the new year and the old year, and they will usher in the new year.
And I do want to end this hour by getting all of your reactions real quick to our intern, Sajina, who interviewed all the voices that we've been hearing this hour at the Lunar New Year celebration in Wethersfield. And here she is.
So I'm Nepali, and I don't really celebrate Lunar New Year. But on that cold February evening, I stood inside Wethersfield Community Center, and as I listened to the screeches of happy kids running about and the hum of people passing by in brightly colored traditional clothing, I couldn't help but feel connected to them. Every person I talked to had their own way of celebrating this holiday. Getting a haircut from mom, cooking as a way of teaching their kids their culture, or learning how to play mahjong from grandma. What connected each of these traditions and what made me feel so at home even as an outsider was that each way of celebrating centered around someone they deeply cared for. The love just shined through. I mean, I don't personally receive red envelopes full of cash, but I do remember feeling that giddy excitement when an older family member blessed me with money and gifts. I don't know how to play mahjong, but the love that permeated as one community organizer patiently taught others to play the game reminded me of how patiently my cousins taught me how to play jutpati, which is a Nepali card game that I never quite got the hang of. Sorry. Yes, each Asian American community weaves the tapestry of the Lunar New Year differently, but they're all tied and bound by the same human form of love and care.
So we only have about 30 seconds here, but Quan, I would love to ask for you to respond to Sajina's response because we're all crying right now.
I mean, I love the fact that she didn't celebrate Lunar New Year, but feels like it's a part of something that she could participate in. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? Is that it's also offering a site and a space for us to come together.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming together today for this show. You've been listening to Dr. Quan Tran, Mike Keogh, and Sounthaly Thammavong. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you, Kat.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Katie Pellico, and major special thanks to our intern, Sajina Shrestha. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And a reminder that we are in the middle of our April Pledge Drive, and we rely on our listeners for support. So if you can go to ctpublic.org/donate to give a few dollars or up your monthly contribution, we would really appreciate it. And thank you all so much for your support.
อยู่ឆ្នើមចាំទេសួនមានតែរូបអូនដែលជាដង្ហើមចំពោះអនុអងចិនមកសងខឹមញញឹមថាបានជាគ្រូវាសនាអបានដំបងខ្ញុំពងយូរហើយ